Right. Good morning, everyone. We're going to have a quick, just as we're waiting for everyone to join the meeting, we're going to have a quick video from our commercial sponsors, which is City Fair, and let's run that now.
Welcome to City Fair 2020, Europe's B2b Networking Workshop for destinations, organised by ETOA, the European Tourism Association, in partnership with European Cities Marketing. This year's City Fair will be more important than ever as we look forward to 2021 and beyond. The workshop will offer one of the first occasions to have open and productive conversations about client needs and their demands for new and adaptive travel product as we enter recovery. 2020 is an exceptional year, and at ETOA we've been hard at work to respond to the changing circumstances, finding a solution to best serve the needs of the industry and our members. A live, in-person event would not have been practical this summer. Instead, we will now deliver our tried and tested B2b Networking Workshop online. City Fair 2020 will provide over 5,000 high-quality meetings between European tourism suppliers and those taking their product to market. A perfect opportunity to reconnect with existing contacts and meet new leads, discovering new ways to work together to ensure a successful and sustainable recovery. The registration and appointment matching system are not changing. As usual, we'll ask you to select and rank your counterparts based on your preferences. We'll then use this data to create dedicated appointment schedules. Of the day of the event, rather than attending in person, all you will need to do is log on to our online portal and participate in your meetings via video link. Once the day's sessions have begun, and again exactly like a typical ETOA workshop, your meetings will run according to schedule. Our system will log you into the next meeting automatically. Sign up today and join your industry colleagues in this cost-effective way to help stimulate the recovery of the European tourism industry. Select, connect and meet. Share your priorities, and we can make the most of these very real opportunities on offer in 2021 and beyond.
Right, good morning. This is going to be a webinar about London. Most of you know that London is the central, along with Paris, it's really the central product that we have to sell in Europe throughout the world. And last year, London had 40 million visitors, according to Visit Britain. And those visitors spent £29 billion. London, of course, stopped in mid-March. And for the last 3 months, really nothing has happened on the tourism level in London. And I think it's fair to say that the Q2 period, which this broadly spans, represents roughly, being a sort of shoulder period, it's roughly a quarter of all spend and all of all visitors. So effectively, London's lost £10 billion and roughly 7.5 million visitors. In this, it's not unique, but the question will be really how London goes about recovering. And I'm absolutely delighted that today we're being joined by Professor Tony Travers from the London School of Economics, who is an old friend of ETOA, and he also sits on the London Recovery Board, which is the body ostensibly helping London recover itself from the current crisis. We're also being joined by Jace Tyrrell, who's the Chief Executive of the New West End Company, and Jace will be talking about what the impact the current crisis has had on the West End and how he thinks the recovery will occur and what is needed to help that recovery happen. I also expect to be joined by Bernard. We're having 1 or 2 technical difficulties, but when Bernard arrives, we will be hearing what is happening to the visitor attractions in London, and Bernard also has an angle on the theatre and the theatre world in which he's involved. So without any more ado, I will hand straight over to Tony to give us a quick introduction as to what he thinks the impact and the prospects are for London. Tony.
Okay, well, thanks, Tom, and good morning, all. I'll just speak for sort of 5 or 6 minutes. I'll keep an eye on the watch as I do this. obviously, this is an incident, a crisis without precedent since 1945. Let's just start there. I mean, nothing quite like it has happened. London and other big cities have had to put up with pretty dire things such as terrorist attacks, which have undoubtedly damaged their economy, and particularly the tourism economy, but nothing on this scale, nothing like a complete close down. It's had profound impacts on the UK government's public finances, on the debt, deficit and therefore debt, and is likely to remove conservatively 8 to 10% of GDP in 2020. Okay, so again, nothing like this, not even the financial and banking crisis of 2008-9. So it is a major incident. It has a particularly has a differential impact by sector, which is an issue, obviously. Interestingly, financial and business services, heavily located in London, have been barely affected, whereas leisure, tourism and the central London economy more generally will have been badly affected. And I'll come on to that in a moment. And the simple reason for this is that central areas, downtowns, are places where people congregate. I know this is obvious, but bear with me. People congregate in large numbers. That's what makes them work. They are therefore massively productive. Central London is a significant share of the London economy and therefore of the UK economy. And to put it bleakly, social distancing and everything to do with it is the enemy of agglomeration. That is the underlying problem. So if you live in a country house, you know, with a sort of your own water and electricity and sewage supply, you're fine. But if you rely on heavy amounts of infrastructure and lots of people, it's very bad indeed. Now, what are the key issues looking forward? Well, clearly, the question is how to get people confident enough to come in large numbers back to their places of work and indeed to travel to London. These are very similar issues in some ways. They're about confidence and about government regulation changing to allow places to be seen to be usable again. I've interestingly been in the West End all the way through this crisis, and you know, in the early days, almost as a sort of comfort, you know, took bleak photographs of empty streets, and the shocking difference is, of course, the one that the tourism and related industries now are feeling as an economic effect. And just to give you a sense of this, before lockdown, 1.5 million people roughly came into the central area of London to work every morning. That number will be down by 95, 97%. Perhaps it's up a little bit again now, but it's precisely reflected in the collapse or the removal, in fact, of civil aviation and therefore travel in and out of the UK. So the question is, which industries are most affected by this? Well, obviously, retail. We'll hear from Jace in a moment about Oxford Street, Regent Street and Bond Street. All aspects of leisure, nightlife and so on, which rely on people being in buzzy places at scale. And of course, the theatre sector. And just as a sidebar, a significant proportion of all theatre box office takings exist or are made in the West End, and if that isn't returned to normal soon, the whole UK theatre sector will be damaged. And Andrew Lloyd Webber was on the radio this morning, predictably optimistic about getting the London Palladium going using means, I think, adopted from South Korea. Anyway, the most optimistic and thought-through person I've heard for some time, to be honest, about actually getting something done in the sphere that we're discussing this morning. So well done him. Now, the politics of all of this, of course, boil down to a struggle between public health interests and economic interests. So this is a struggle going on within government at the moment. Many Conservative MPs, backbenchers in particular, support Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, who wants to get the economy going again, but the sort of more cautious health interests within government are definitely going for a slower return. And the trouble with the slower return is, if I can slightly hint at where I lie on this spectrum, that there's a risk of a structural change to the economy. And this, of course, will be true in Paris and New York as well as in London, by the way. These cities are struggling with exactly the same issues, though I do detect, because they have no choice, Hong Kong and Singapore must have tackled these issues. They have no choice. They've got to tackle them because they are cities and city-states, in effect. And so there's no choice. You can't all go and live in the country or something, or stop trading other than from the city itself. So that is something I think we need to think about, how other cities are moving ahead here. So lots of pressure on the government to get the economy open again. And just with that in mind, it is intriguing to me as an observer of politics and economics how very upfront the airlines have been, brilliantly articulating the weakness of the government's position again and again, getting some stick back, but in the end, they've been really out there. I think the cultural industries are now getting their act together. They've realized just how bad things are going to be. And bars, pubs, and the sort of retail, the licensed trade also now getting going on putting pressure on government. And the point I'm making here is that it seems to me that tourism organisations absolutely have to do the same and have their voice heard and loud. 2 or 3 final things, then I'll stop. Clearly, all 3 levels of government in London are involved in getting back to normal. And by the way, I think there's a crucial point to make here. There's 2 ways you can move ahead from where we are now. One is just gradually to remove the lockdown over some long period and see what happens and react to it. The other, which I think the government needs to do, governments at all levels need to do, is to decide they want to get back to the economy of January this year and then deliver it. It's a very different thing. And that requires making decisions about what we're trying to do and then just delivering it. Now, central government has to decide how to end the furlough scheme and support for businesses, massively important for many in tourism, obviously, and the central London industries. The mayor has responsibility for large parts of transport and roads, and that's an important element in this. And then, of course, the boroughs are very, very key to this because they're the people who can make decisions like opening up the streets. I'm sure we'll hear from Jace about this, allowing planning, sort of licensing and planning, lightening of those rules in order to allow businesses to use streets open late and so on. Personally, I would lobby the government to move to double summertime till the end of the year, or at least not to the end till the end of summertime. That would give an extra hour of trading in the daylight all the way through from now till the end of October. Simple, cheap. Sure that diary makers wouldn't like it, but it's one thing we could do. So just to conclude, this sounds a bit bleak and gloomy, and it is a bit bleak and gloomy. My only more optimistic way of ending this is to say, I think 20 years from now, London will have recovered, and Paris and New York will have recovered. The question is, is it a long flat line followed by a gradual uptick, or can we get back to where we were a year ago or even 6 months ago? And that, I think, is where politicians need to be pressed to decide to do that, to deliver it. Thanks, Tom.
Cool.
Excuse me, I put myself on mute. I mean, the open question, and this is the question everyone's asking, of course, is it a V-shaped recovery or a U-shaped recovery? And what is the length of the lower bit of the U? And none of us really know. I think, Tony, one thing I would say to everybody listening, and we have nearly 200 people already logged in, you can ask questions on the question bar if you want to pose any questions, and I'll be coming to those after I've finished the general discussion. Just out of interest, Bernard, I think, is there not in video but in audio. Bernard, can you hear me and can we hear you? Silence. Fine. Well, we'll get through that technical problem in a minute. Jace, please tell us about the new West End.
Tom, thank you very much. And Tony, great for the introduction. I know you're a resident of our little cohort around the great golden triangle that is Bond, Oxford and Regent Street, with everything from Prada to Primark. And like Tony, there was sort of, I hate the word unprecedented, but it really was unprecedented, shutting down the West End for 12 weeks and actually seeing 5% footfall, something we've never seen in my lifetime and hopefully we'll never see again. And just to point, there was extraordinary act of kindness and community that was really terrific, from everything from Claridge's to John Lewis to Selfridges. And actually, I hope out of all this, some of that great work of vulnerable people in the community will continue well out of this as we come into sort of recovery. So the great retail area of the West End, of course, the West End isn't just retail. The ecology of the West End, the fact that it is a major tourist attraction, the fact that 9 out of 10 visitors that come to London come to the West End is because of the theatre and the restaurants and the bars and the whole ecology of the area. And of course, the retail, both high end and mass and everything in between, benefits from that tourism.
I'm just going to see if it works now.
Bernard, we can hear you, yes, so that's great. Jace, please carry on. It's a wonderful intervention. A welcome intervention.
Very good. And I think for us, the big numbers are in normal time.
Really working tools. So I think I'm just going to.
Bernard, it might be an idea to put yourself on mute whilst Jace is talking. Jace, please carry on.
Crack on. In normal times, 10 billion a year in sales, and 50% of that is tourism. And that's it. 50% has been wiped off this year, pretty much, you know, in terms of when we think we're going to get tourists back. And within that, we have a very interesting mix of high value tourists. So 60% of that spend, the 5 billion, is from our friends in China and the Middle East, which is a hugely important high value market for us, supporting retail from our perspective, but also the hoteliers and everything else that goes as part of that ecology. So where have we been? We obviously had the shutdown, a huge amount of work, obviously, to make it safe and secure, as many of our retailers have told us, and I think we at New West End think the same, that it's far easier to shut down a city centre than reopen it. So we spent the last couple of months getting into a lot of detail of the guidelines, which has been mixed at times, but at least now we have guidelines for retail. I think the biggest message that the government is give as much notice as possible to the hospitality sector as they start to reopen, not days, but weeks, so they can make decisions around their staff and their costs and their operation. We had a bit of fanfare on Monday. It was a bit like Christmas reopening the West End, but as Tony alluded to, we had 20% footfall. So we know for at least 3 or 4 months, we're not going to get much more than 20–25% footfall. We're not going to have the tourists probably till the end of the year in any meaningful way. And we're not going to have the office workers back for quite some time. So we're dealing with Londoners and local. And I say to any Londoners listening, you'll never have a West End like it or a summer like it. So get out there and come and visit us, quite frankly. But I think in terms of the policy, I mean, I shared Tony's view that I think the retail sector, probably because we came out of it earlier than the other sectors, have been very good at coalescing and lobbying and really advising the government on how we can have a safe reopening, but also the economic impact. I think the challenge for us is they look at retail as a whole, and what they're not thinking about is the big international centres of the UK. So whether it's the West End, highly reliant on international customers for the spend in retail, Manchester, Edinburgh, Bicester Village, you know, with Chinese clients, that we probably need to work with the tourism sector to make the case on some of the measures and some of the policy asks that we need to help in our recovery as well. And I'm actually chairman of an organisation called the Association of International Retail, which primarily looks at these big international centres that I mentioned, with Knightsbridge and Harrods as well, to point the government into those bits of the country that actually have a high reliance on international visitors, and for that bit of the economy as well. So theatres, hoteliers, hospitality, leisure and retail all coming together. So the 3 big asks for us, and you won't be surprised to hear some of these policy asks, if you like, but the social distancing is an absolute disaster for us, as Tony has alluded to. And the sooner we can move away from 2 meters, 1 meter, the better for all bits of the hospitality, leisure, retail sector. And remember, 1 in 5 Londoners are actually employed in those sectors. So hugely, you know, high risk if we don't move beyond social distancing soon. And I think what we're encouraging every conversation with the Chancellor, with various departments across government, is move away from social distancing being the default. Get effective track and trace, which we heard more about yesterday with Google and Apple. Let's have very good treatments, which again, we had some good news earlier in the week. And let's hope and work there'll be a vaccine this side of Christmas. It's going to build that confidence up that Tony was talking about for people to come outside. So I hope there'll be some movement on social distancing very soon, particularly as hospitality starts to open up in that early July. The quarantine is hugely damaging, not for now, because I think we all, well, it is now, but we recognize we're not going to have international visitors here for some time. But what is not happening, I'm sure your viewers know this far better than we do, is those forward bookings, those Americans, US, Middle East, Chinese visitors that book 4, 5, 6 months in advance. If we don't have a level playing field with Europe, we're not on the list. You know, they're not thinking about London. And already we're probably quite damaged in the way we've dealt with the pandemic for our reputation globally. So for us, thinking about 21 and trying to get that V shape back, this quarantine is not going to give any sense of confidence to book a trip to London, you know. So we really need to get the level playing field and not have a proxy sort of Brexit negotiation through the quarantine that I fear might be happening, but I'm sure others might have a view on that as well. And then finally is more sort of domestic policy and local, as Tony alluded to with the boroughs and London, is if we're going to have a summer with 20%, let's try and get that a bit higher. If we can have some outdoor trading, some relaxation of planning and licensing. And to be fair to Westminster City Council, they came up this week with some very good proposals that we've been working with them on in the background. They're one of the first actually in London boroughs to come out with this, quite bold, really taking out that sort of requirement of all the licensing and planning regulation and bureaucracy perhaps that's required, and rightly so. We don't want this to be permanent. These are temporary measures to really help spark some confidence and demand this summer. So I'm pleased actually the government and the boroughs have been working together with business on that, and perhaps in central London we'll see some legacy of this. So we have turned the streets over to more pedestrians, some outdoor, more al fresco European. Maybe some of these measures could be kept a bit more permanently if they work and they don't upset our local communities too much, and that will be good for London and the West End moving forward. I'll just close by sort of saying that the retail sector was already going through massive structural change. And for us in the West End, we predicted before the pandemic around 25–30% fewer retailers in the next 5 years. There was already a change of customers wanting a completely different retail proposition, this pronounced shift to online that we've been talking about for such a long time, and this whole experience retail, if you like. But I'm more optimistic with Tony. I hope it's not 20 years. But actually, what you'll see in the big city centres of London and Manchester and Edinburgh is the very best of the retail, from the brand, the quality, the experience. Selfridges do it so brilliantly. And actually, for people selling London and for tourists, they're going to have an incredible retail leisure offer in the next 2 or 3 years, and probably one of the best in the world if we get this right. And actually, that puts us and firmly cements our position as a high street, a global city centre that is innovative and entrepreneurial, and I hope that will help keep us on the bookings of our international visitors that are so critical for the 10 billion of the West End ecology. And I think I'll pause there, Tom. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jace. I mean, I suppose the question that springs from you, and it's the bombshell you mentioned right at the beginning, which is that the West End is functioning with a 20% footfall. And that was on opening up. That was the floodgate. That was opening up for the floodgates and the pent-up demand to rush in. And you've not got 50% of your customer base because they've been banned by the Home Office. You say that the West End will change. It may change very dramatically in such trading circumstances. I mean, do you think? To put it really bluntly, this is a really bleak wind blowing down Oxford Street.
Oh, it's horrendous. I mean, I sort of sound optimistic, but it is significant and hugely damaging. And we've got 18 months of some very severe pain. And we're looking perhaps out of 150,000 employees, 50,000 of those won't have jobs by Christmas in the West End. I mean, it's that serious, and this is lives and livelihoods. So I know when we talk about numbers of 50,000 jobs, 5 billion less spend, they just seem like numbers on a page, but this is really significant, which is why we need these measures lifted and why the government needs to recognize that the West End isn't just retail like the grocery stores up in other parts of the country, that actually for international centres like the West End, we're going to need measures and support far beyond just the retail sector measures they've got in place. So yeah, Tom, I completely agree, and this is doomsday scenario stuff that we're having to deal with at the moment.
Tony, you're about to intervene, then we'll move to Bernard.
Yeah, just one thought. I mean, you know, we must always believe there are opportunities in these dire days. And the one thing I do think there's an opportunity that the West End, like as Jace rightly says, the middle of Manchester, the middle of Edinburgh and Leeds and places. And these are the places that, insofar as retail lives in the long term, it will survive because there will always be more footfall. Then the question is how far we can work with the local authorities to ensure that empty shops and restaurants are filled with interesting new things. And there are lots and lots of you know, potential new businesses that could open up in these places that couldn't afford to before, much more interesting offer, and so move away from the homogenization of streets, which is often with which they're often criticized. So I think carefully managed, there could be advantages to all of this, getting new businesses in. By the way, you know, office space in London is going to be cheaper, and that will make it easier for new businesses, startups to operate from the centre of the city. But it has to be encouraged.
And just to echo that, I mean, the costs of doing business in the West End, particularly the rents and the rates, were absolutely out of kilter with the market. So already we're seeing a shift there. So you're right, Tony. If we rebase the cost of doing business in the West End, we could get some very interesting, exciting businesses that actually were priced out previously. And if the policy supports the market, then we can repurpose this whole bit of London, which again will help the tourism drive. And I do, to be fair to our local council and others, they understand this problem and they are pointing in the right direction. It's the reality of business and market changes that are going to be so rapid that have to sort of work through that in real time with dealing with the pandemic as well.
Right, I believe Bernard has had furious technical difficulties and cannot join us. Bernard, if you're there, can you say something? No, okay. Look, what I'm going to do very quickly now, we've got a few questions that we're going to poll our audience, if I may. And I'm just going to launch a poll now, which is simply to say, it's a question about, it's a question about, have you noticed changing product? And the questions are, there's no change in demand. Clients are seeking new health and safety measures. Clients are seeking different products. Clients are seeking products away from cities, and clients are more interested in small groups. It'd be very interesting to see what people say. I'll keep that poll open, and the people who are witnessing this, from the speaker's point of view, can only see those questions. And I'll close it in about 30 seconds. Jace, we say there's a chill wind, and Tony raised the point of homogenization. It's actually very important from a tourism point of view for us to have a vibrant local demand being expressed in the products that we sell. So that's a very garbled phrase, but I suppose what I'm trying to say is that when we sell somewhere like Paris or we sell somewhere like Rome, we're not only selling the attractions that are based there, but we're selling the taste of the local inhabitants as expressed in the service economy. And one of the things people want to do when they go to Rome or they want to go to Paris is they want to be Parisians and they want to enjoy the things that Parisians enjoy. So you go to Paris to be in a restaurant, you go to Rome to be in an Italian restaurant and shop in Parisian shops. And what Tony is alluding to is the sort of increase almost of localization and dehomogenization in the retail offer that we have to a certain extent vibrantly in the restaurant and pub offer. Is this something that you expect to see happening?
Yeah, and I think pre-pandemic it was already happening. You think around bits of Mayfair and around Grosvenor Square, there's some lovely independent sort of retail opening up there. We've got about 200 galleries in Mayfair. I think people forget that actually when we talk about retail, it's the galleries, it's those other bits of retail economy, if you like, rather than just perhaps Primark on Oxford Street. Of course, the Primarks on Oxford Street and the high street brands do have a place, but often you find in the West End, they're the very best manifestation of that. It will be the biggest store, the brightest. You'll often have product that you won't get in other bits of the UK. Think about Selfridges, the incredible department store, and how they just do the whole experience of retail theatre. And you think about some of those side streets of Marlow, Benefits, Ferrovia, the villages, if you like, around the core West End. That is a London experience. That's the stuff we know. And obviously we want our tourists to go there and behave like a Londoner when they come and enjoy some of that. But But I think already there was a shift of the types of brands that we're thinking about the West End. I know there's some sites on Oxford Street that are empty at the moment, boarded up around Crossrail, and there are brands we never thought would think about Oxford Street. And when you think about retail, it's not retail as you and I know it, it's very different type of retail that's come from Southeast Asia. So I hope that will help the product, if you like, I think you're alluding to, Tom, of the West End, support sort of the restaurant and diverse offer that they've got, and some of the cultural attractions. You've got to remember, we're in a wonderful square mile of these galleries, theatres, restaurants and retail that is, other cities often have it quite spread out. If you think about New York, you've got to travel up and down Manhattan to find all these bits. We've got, 1-2 square miles of this most incredible, enriching offer that I hope we can remind our international visitors how compelling that offer is.
I've got a question here. We've got questions flooding in. I suppose this is a speculative question, but what area of tourism leisure do you think to recover first? What do you think's going to be first, and what do you think is going to be last? I have an opinion on this, but I'm mainly interested to hear what yours are. Tony, why don't you start?
Well, I mean, observing, JC's grand reopening on Monday in real time, and I was surprised how many people were there.
Yeah,
it's clear many of them were young. The young flooded back. They were very young. Now, I know young people spend less than the moneyed middle-aged and the people like me, older in my case. But the truth is, I can easily see the young being relatively swift back, both from London, rest of the UK. I think the rest of the UK is a market we might think about for a while in London, which we haven't really in the recent past. So I would have thought that the sort of getting young people first will be easiest. They'll be most willing to come back. There'll be lots of deals to be done on planes and trains when they all get going. So that would be my instinct. That's just based on looking at the people who were there on Monday and Tuesday.
Yeah. I share Tony's view. It felt like Boxing Day. It was very young and lots of cash that hadn't spent for 12 weeks. So that was good. The Nikes and the JD Sports did very well, if you like. As the week went on, perhaps the quality, I use that word in inverted commas, of the shopper changed during the week, and Bond Street boutiques started to see spend. And actually, the conversion rates were 90%. So and the basket size were incredible. So there's certainly pent-up demand and cash. And as Tony says, we have a very vibrant financial professional services sector that are working, and they have money in London. So we want to make sure they're spending it, obviously, in the near term in the West End. I share Tony's view, domestic tourism. Interesting though, we think that the Middle East is a key market for us, and we might get a bit of that at the end of summer if we can sort out our quarantine. And we have 12 hoteliers who are part of New West End Company family, including Claridge's and the Mayborn Group and others. And I had a conversation with them a couple of weeks ago, and they're looking at about 50–60% on the bookings in the last quarter. And some of that's international, which is great actually. So that does give some confidence for the second half of the year, if you like. But China for February, March, we want to get the Chinese back for New Year next year if we can. That might be too optimistic. We certainly feel that would be very important to start 21 with Chinese visitors here in February. America, we think will be slow, not least with the election and the pandemic and the scale of what they're dealing with at the moment there. Europe is very interesting for us because Brexit, 1st of January, we suddenly could be tax-free in the UK. And suddenly 500 million Europeans can shop in the UK without VAT. And that's worth about 1.4 billion. And this requires a stroke of a pen on one line to make sure that it's equalized, because at the moment, we'll be able to go over there on the 1st of January and shop tax-free, but they're not necessarily able to come here. So we're lobbying on this very point at the moment. So for European, which isn't obviously beneficial to you, Tom, and your membership base, but for us, having Europeans able to shop in London tax-free and the Manchester's, Edinburgh's, very, very good opportunity for us in the medium term as well for next year. So if there's any silver lining of Brexit, perhaps it is our great shoppers of Europe will come here tax-free.
Yeah, Tom, you said you had your own ideas. What are your? What do you think?
No, I just to comment on that. I think the prospect of having tax-free shopping is undoubtedly there. I worry slightly more about the inability of the UK to negotiate a sensible border arrangement. If we don't have one of those and we have several hour queues to get in and out, then any benefit from the VAT VAT break will disappear. I mean, I broadly agree with both of you. I mean, what's interesting about the current crisis is that young people are the constituency. And in fact, anybody under 50, really anybody under 60, the crisis, the virus poses no really doesn't pose any kind of health threat. All the problems in terms of the coronavirus are focused around the vulnerable, the compromised, and the elderly. If you're a young person, it's almost a non-event, and yet your behavior and your lifestyle has been dramatically affected by this. And I think young people will be the people who are already kicking against it. They're already, as the phrase is, doing a Cummins. They're taking the laws into their own hands, and they're choosing what they think is right for them. And if anybody who lives near Hampstead Heath or any other area will see them congregating and enjoying themselves as they think fit. And I think you're quite right. The young people will be the first people to come back into the market. I think, though, there is one big problem with the UK at the moment, which is its international reputation is down in the dumps. Everybody has been feasting on our performance on coronavirus. The fact that we have performed badly in the world is headline news everywhere. And if you're worried about coronavirus, then the UK is not a great place to go at the moment.
Well, but Tom, I mean, I know what you mean, and I will stand in a line of people to criticise the government's collective response. But I think Mr. Macron's getting a pretty bad press in France about France's response. And I mean, whatever they've done, the truth is that there are not many cases now in the UK. I mean, it's in a sense, despite the chaos of the response politically, the actual number of cases is such that Britain isn't that badly out of line. I'd be amazed if people really thought we can't come to Britain when we could go to name other countries in Europe. I think, but I take your point about what it looks like politically. But the truth on the ground is that there are plenty of parts of England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland where there are no cases of coronavirus at all.
I know, and they're not particularly welcoming to visitors at the moment.
Well, that's a separate issue. Whether keep out or keep out, I know.
There may be that, no, but in general, what I was trying to say was that but if you're worried about coronavirus, you won't be travelling. If you're the sort of person who's genuinely concerned about it, you will stay set. And the big threat, if you're travelling, doesn't lie in destination. It doesn't lie in the hotels. It doesn't lie in the shops or the restaurants. The principal danger lies in going through airports and on airlines. And if you're willing to take that, and I'm be standing at the front of the queue saying to people, you ought to be willing to risk that. You're risking that because you think the experience is worth the risk. And the moment you've decided that what you want to go and enjoy is worth the risks associated with it, then you will travel. And I think there's going to reach a tipping point where people suddenly decide, actually, this is worth doing. And when we hit that point, I don't know when it is, but when we hit that point, we will start seeing confidence flood back into the market. But the crucial question will be is what kind of a product have we got to sell? And what's interesting is that there is both a recognition here that we've got unparalleled challenges, economic challenges facing the West End and the whole of London. And I'm sorry Bernard isn't here because he would be telling us how the attraction sector and how the theatre section has been hit. Unparalleled challenges. But if they can get through this period, then I think we'll be in a reasonably good condition for 2021. In fact, what we'll do is I'll launch another poll. The last poll, if I may, we asked them, have you noticed any changing product requirements from clients? And this wasn't, you could opt to choose any of them. So this wasn't an either or set of questions. 37% felt that there was no change really in any demand from clients. 55% said that clients are seeking new health and safety assurances, and that's the winner. 34% said clients are more interested in small groups and FIT packages rather than group packages. 15% said clients are seeking different destinations or products, and 13%, so it's the smallest amount, said that clients are seeking products away from cities. So the drive is not away from cities, according to this poll. And I'm going to launch another poll, if I may, because we've got 4 to get through, if we can get through them all. I'm going to find them. I just want to know about the recovery immediately. Thinking about the recovery, when do you expect the first significant wave of visitors to arrive in Europe? And I'm going to launch this. And you've got 3 choices, so the poll is open. Jace, Bernard was going to be here to talk about the attractions and also partly the theatres. Theatres are in the West End. Do we have any idea of when they're going to open, or are they still assuming that? I mean, Cameron McIntosh said he was going to close for the rest of the year just recently. Have we got any purchase on when we think theatres are going to start again?
Well, I sort of get this from various groups and calls. I'm sure Tony's on some of these as well. So people like the Society of London Theatre, and indeed Bernard's group is well tapped into this. We've got a couple of theatres in our patch, but I think about a month ago, I think they were more optimistic around sort of thinking about September, October. But what sort of you hear and read this week is, it could be January time. It might not be here for Christmas. And I think this is why the social distancing, and I know there's a lot of political headwind on this for the theatres particularly, is to get away from 1 and 2 meters, and actually all these other measures need to be in place, which I think is what Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber and looking at what they've done in South Korea, as you said earlier. So I think hopeful for last quarter of this calendar year, realistic probably January on next year for a lot of them. And the issue is, and Tony alluded to this, with that gap, we suddenly have structural changes to the economy and structural changes to the theatre sector, where we probably could have coped with opening in September in some way and held on some of those jobs and some of the sort of revenue that would have driven as well. So yeah, not looking very hopeful for theatre, because let's remember they're very compacted areas, aren't they? Very difficult to do any form of social distancing in there, and sub-economic to open when you've got a 20% audience. Same for retail, dealing with 20% footfall, but they want to open and start to operationalize and try and make some money on margins. And retail, just to touch on that briefly, is 15 billion of stock sitting in warehouses in the UK, so it needs to be sold in some way. So yeah, not that optimistic for theatre, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, I'm going to close this poll. It's a very snap poll of our viewers, and the people attending this range from suppliers through to tour operators, both based in America, Europe, the UK, and China. And Japan as well. Interesting enough, 4%, which is an optimistic few people, think that we're going to see a recovery before the end of September. 26% think that the recovery is going to occur in October, November, or December, but 70% think that the recovery is going to be in 2021. And I will close the poll and we'll go back to this thing. That's interesting insofar as this is a statistically relevant sample, and I tend to be oversensitive on sample sizes. That shows a slightly more optimistic pitch than it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. This is what we're doing here, is we're running a whole series of webinars on destinations, and we've had one on Italy, Spain, France, and the Nordic region. We've also had drop-ins from the Alemanophone areas and the Netherlands. In broad terms, this shows a slightly more optimistic position in terms of people returning than we thought before. So this is vaguely good news. Tony, you're about to say something.
Don't you think, you alluded, I mean, this undoubtedly, because of the messaging about all of the health risks, there will be a proportion of the population who are going to remain pretty well very cautious for some time, until and unless governments encourage them. By the way, at some point, I think governments should encourage them. But there'll be another significant share of the population, and I count myself amongst this group, who will go travelling as soon as they're allowed to within the rules. And I think once the rules become clearer and it's possible to get travelling, there will be a lot of pent-up demand, exactly as the young people on Oxford Street on Monday and Tuesday. And then the question is how to encourage that pent-up demand. And separately, I think there would need to be kickstart events. I mean, personally, it seems to me Christmas is a real intriguing idea here for central cities. You know, I know Oliver Cromwell's unfairly blamed for banning Christmas, but the truth is, you know, is Jace the person to rescue Christmas? You know, and you know, best Christmas ever in the West End kind of thing. And I do think some kickstart opportunities have to be found to make people who want to go travelling get out there, because I think they want to. I think lots of people do want to. They just need to feel confident and know the rules that they can get across borders. I mean, that's the thing. Can you get across a border without having to fill in pieces of paper and be expected to quarantine? Once that changes, I think quite a lot will change.
And I agree. I think I won't say the floodgates open. The question is just how do we get momentum in there? I've got a question here. Say London as we know it today has survived a depression and 2 world wars, along with numerous acts of terrorism. What is the one single change you would like to see in the city as a result of this pandemic that sets London up as a city for the future, for all of us who use and visit it? That's an excellent general question. Can you think of one good thing to happen other than removing the quarantine, Jace?
I think it's the environment. You know, we are in serious risk if we don't sort out the air quality in central London, you know, and actually customers won't want to come, employees don't want to work here, visitors won't want to visit, you know, and I think we've got to get to scale this effort to get everything electric, get us on carbon zero, and particularly the transport, because it's really filthy air. And I think it's now touching all bits of our economy in central London and London as a whole. So mine would be accelerate all the efforts to get the air quality much cleaner in London.
Tony, you've got one.
It's also survived plagues, of course, which are in some ways the most and cholera. And for me, I think it will be something I hinted at earlier. I think there'll be an opportunity for tens of thousands of interesting new businesses. I know I'm being a bit cavalier about the businesses that are going to lose their existence, and I'm trying not to do that. But I do think there'll be lots and lots of new and interesting businesses emerge, as in, you know, an area where there's been a forest fire, you get all sorts of interesting greenery immediately. And I do think capturing a sense that this is a new London with all sorts of new things in it will mean that even the tourists who've been here 100 times before will now think there's lots of new stuff. And that, I think, is a powerful idea if it's carefully marketed.
So you're saying almost like the sort of retail creativity that you used to see, for instance, in Camden Lock, for example. You will create an area in the West End where new people with new ideas, Kensington Market kind of stuff would start.
The recession in the early 1990s radically transformed Soho for the better in many ways, and it made it much more interesting and variegated. And so again, I'm not saying what's happening is, you know, I don't want for a moment to suggest that businesses are struggling and going out of business. This is a good thing. I'm trying to look forward to saying there will be lots of new businesses, lots of new restaurants, lots of new shops, and it will be a new offer for the city, in addition to all the old stuff which will still be there with luck, or much of it will still be there. The museums and galleries will still be there. We haven't talked about museums and galleries, although they and the attractions have lost people for a while. I think almost all of them are going to survive, aren't they? Certainly the big public ones will survive, and that's something to build on.
I've got. So I'm looking for questions rather than statements. I think we're getting an awful lot of assertions.
Unlike from me.
Well, is there any hope of going? I mean, how crucial? This is not a tourism question, but it relates to tourism, because we obviously tourists come to enjoy the business these people sustain. What is the status of office workers in London? A London without office workers is going to be a very different commercial and indeed cultural proposition for tourists to come and visit. Jace, you must be looking at this, and Tony, I'm sure you have an angle.
Yeah, I mean, for us, 2/3 above the retail is office commercial, so it feels very odd not to see our office workers in, you know, the West End. the city of London, you know, is the office, you know, the office bit of the capital. So it's interesting, isn't it? So if you think of a tourist, and we're thinking in London as this summer, but even tourists coming to a bit of a city centre without the office workers will feel very different, wouldn't it? But I actually have a bit more hope they'll start to come back in the autumn. If we get into next year, I would imagine a lot of the office sector will be back in the physical buildings as well, probably working differently, maybe 3 days, not 5, and more flexibility and all that good stuff that goes with it. I'm sure Tony's got a bit more insight onto this and what the office commercial sector is saying. But for us, Monday to Friday, that is a big customer base for us, and obviously tourism is over the weekends primarily, often. So yeah, we're sort of reconfiguring, I guess, our customer base based on the macro trends that are happening around us.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's an adjustment, and some people will have learned that they can work from home for part of the time, and that may mean for a while that fewer people travel in and out of the West End. Therefore, there'll be fewer people shopping and using theatres and so on for a bit. Of course, you can flip this round, and Alex Jan Arup made this point to me recently, that of course you can look at what's happened as the biggest increase in office space ever to occur in London. So suddenly we realise that most of London's GDP can be produced with large numbers of people not in their offices because they're all working at kitchen tables and in sheds in the garden and things. Now, so actually we've had a massive increase in the number of people, sorry, the office space. And that means London's vastly more competitive now. It's got a huge amount of extra office space. New businesses will be able to open in that. New businesses will be able to move into London at a lower cost. So again, I don't go on to, you know, this I think is again, if it's carefully handled, we can get new businesses, new office space, and make it radically easier for new businesses to expand in central London.
Yeah,
flexibility, agility that Tony talks about, we're quite inhibited. We need that agility and flex in the space, which is obviously going to help the product, which obviously helps London, you know, evolve to what next is London's offer effectively.
One of the things London does have as an advantage is the great estates, the Crown Estate, Grosvenor, and all the others, and even some of the newer ones, who I'm sure will be thinking carefully about protecting their rents over 50 years, not trying to get them in out of their tenants within this year. And that will allow some creativity in how existing occupiers are handled, I think.
It's the first time I've heard the factors of the Duke of Westminster seen as angels of compassion, but I mean, things might happen.
Because they have a long time horizon, Tom.
Yeah.
They think 100-year chunks, not 20-week chunks.
I've been asked to stress that the Cameron McIntosh announcement of cancellations of shows is an outlier, and indeed his statement could be reversed. There are shows planning on opening when, we're not sure, but the West End is not formally closed as a theatre venue for the rest of this year, and it's well worth pointing out that things will open up there. When and how, we're not sure. I think the other question really is a technical travel one, but world travel market, we're not sure what is happening to world travel market. Reed have made it very clear that it's happening. Jace, do you think world travel market as a sort of showcase for London is important, and do you think we should be fighting to make sure it takes place?
I don't know, actually. I mean, we haven't gone for a few years, and I'll probably ask you, Tom, to give me a view on that, if I'm honest, because I mean, we're very niche. We look at some high value markets, China, Middle East. We're not in the big volume game in the West End, particularly for sort of Mayfair, Bond Street. As I said, 9 out of 10 tourists come to the West End anyway, so we don't need to sell it too hard. What we do want is more of the high value clients, as I said, Middle East and China. So I don't know if much business generates from there, but you're probably much better placed than I am to answer that.
I think it's just a vote of confidence, and I hear what you're saying about wanting the best kind of clients, but that's a kind of statement implying resources and choice. I think we could do with anybody Quite
sure,
right.
Sure.
So Tony, do you have an angle on that at all?
Well, I mean, it seems to me in the short term, any sense of ways of marketing. There's going to be a need for a marketing campaign, by the way, which I'm sure you know, the government needs to put some money behind this. It's put so much money behind so many things, having discovered that not only was there a magic money tree, there turned out to be a magic money forest, that they can, it seems to me at some point, British tourism as a whole, London tourism in particular that today, you know, and other countries will think the same, I'm sure, in Europe, need to advertise to get people encouraged to start doing. So I think any form of marketing for a while probably needs to be encouraged, including, you know, events, definitely. Oh, by the way, talk about events. I mean, I'm intrigued, others will know the answer. What's the question of London's capacity to hold conferences with the Excel Centre turned into a hospital? And we don't really have any, you know, there's not much capacity with that gone, is there? And others will tell me I'm wrong.
I'm going to have to launch another poll. While I'm doing that, I'm going to, and the question is, long-haul tourism to Europe will diversify to more destinations. This is to compare with the other polls we've launched. So if you could answer this very quickly, I'd be very grateful. Thank you. Look, I mean, everyone's talking about July the 4th being the opening date, possible opening date for pubs and restaurants. Do we know about this at all, Jace? I mean, have you got a handle on this? When are we going to start to be able to go to West End and enjoy ourselves?
We need everything else as well, but I think, you know, they're working towards the 4th of July. We had a similar scenario with retail that we were going for the 1st of June, and we didn't get confirmation that it was the 15th of June, and it was sort of moving quite rapidly with government. It is sort of a fast-paced decision, this, you know, we've got to get obviously the health piece right before they can open up the hospitality. I think unless we hear otherwise, we are working towards the 4th of July, but it may change, but certainly, you know, they want to get hospitality open. So I think we should assume that is the date for now, but it can obviously change. I think the one point I'd make, Tom, is as much notice as possible. I think retail was quite difficult, that planning, because you've got big decisions on costs and staff and operations, and equally for hospitality, the margins are so thin, and that decision of 1 or 2 meters will be whether you open in July or you don't, quite frankly, and whether I bring my staff up or make them redundant, you know. So these are real life decisions for many, many businesses up and down the country. So the clarity and the advanced notice as possible is every conversation with government, we're making that point.
Okay, we're gently running out of time now. I just want to say one thing and then ask both of you to leave with one thought. I would just stress that from a European point of view, and for the long-haul tourists that my members specialise in, London is seen as part of Europe. It's even more a part of Europe than it is part of the UK, and in some ways their perception is shared by many Londoners. And it is absolutely central to Europe that London is a healthy and attractive destination. I think the biggest single product my tour operator members sell, I mean, the best seller is the London-Paris combination. This is the leading feature they have. And so it's really crucial for us to have a burgeoning, bustling, open London. And it is possible with the weakening in demand in some sectors that the tourism area, and particularly those bits of the tourism areas that are intermediaries that add value by making sales, are really going to come into their own. So it could be a very good period for London. It could be a very good period for those tour operators that sell London, because they really will be adding value. They're not selling something that sells itself quite as much as it used to. Is there any one thought you'd like to leave our audience with? Tony, can I start with you?
Well, I suppose there will be lots of great bargains to be had, won't there, when tourism kicks off again? You know, on every means of travel, and lots of hotels and restaurants and bars are going to be having opening out offers. And so I think, you know, that would be my thought, is to, you know, make sure people realize that they're going to get a better bargain in traveling this year than in any year for decades. And by the way, this is a double-edged thing. You know, they'll have bits of the city to themselves that were normally crowded with other tourists, unlike them, of course, because like, you know, they're sort of upscale. Obviously, we all are when we're traveling ourselves. So I think that it's an opportunity to see a city in a different way. That's how I would, and actually at a better price.
James.
Thank you. I shared Tony's view, actually. He sort of stole mine a little bit, but I mean, I think for any Londoner or UKer on this call, get to the West End this summer, because you'll never have it like it without all the tourists. And as Tony says, the tourists are wanting to come to London second half of this year, you know, discover this city in a new way, and get excited. Let's build that confidence, as you say, for 21 beyond, and move forward.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Jace. Very sorry that Bernard couldn't make us. Thank you, everybody. This will be recorded and on our website, I hope, later on today. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye, John. Bye all.